It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie right here on EWTN. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for calling in. We have lines open right now, and we're going to talk about something today that touches upon many, many lives, and it's often very, very misunderstood. We're going to speak about annulments today. Our phone number is 1-800-585-9396. Annulment is something I don't have any personal experience with, but my lovely and talented co-host Debbie Georgiani does. And Debbie, I know that you've explained on the show you've been through the annulment process. God blessed you with an annulment. You're married to your husband Marty. This is something, Debbie, that I think a lot of people are going to want to kind of perk up to and pay attention to and call in about today.
I agree, Jerry. I mean, actually, it was such an amazing experience, and I know that might sound, strange because they're out on the street. So many people are saying, "Oh, wow, the annulment process. It's costly. It takes so much time. There's so much paperwork." And I really found it to be an amazing healing process, and we thought today was just the perfect. A perfect topic to address because we're going to clear up all the misconceptions about annulments, and we want to hear from you. And we're already getting, Jerry, and this is interesting, we're already getting a lot of emails of our listeners saying, please, I want to hear all about annulments. So this is what we're going to suggest rather than us having to respond to many, many emails individually. Please go to take2show.com, and Jeff is so amazing about posting the archive of the show, and you can listen to the show and learn about at your leisure when you can play it at home, and you can learn all about annulments. So jump in. We've already got a couple calls coming in. This is going fast. 1-800-585-9396.
And a topic like this, it's delicate, it's important, it's got to be understood properly. And while Debbie and I could speak to many aspects of the annulment process, we thought we would bring in someone who can do a whole lot better than that. Colin Donovan, who, if I have it right, Colin, you're the Vice President of Theology at EWTN. Do I have that right, Colin?
Yes, Jerry. That's my official title, I guess.
Well, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. You're also on the EWTN Open Line on Friday. So, folks, you've got a gentleman here who has studied and knows really a whole lot about all of the church's teachings and disciplines and practices. So any annulment question, if you've been through an annulment, maybe you're in the middle of one right now and you're thinking, well, I've met this great person, can I date this person now while the annulment process is going on? Or maybe you just want to share that it was traumatic and painful, or maybe you're among those who say, well, that's you Catholics, that's just your form of divorce. You're just kind of couching divorce in the terms of annulment. Our number is 1-800-585-9396. And Colin, let's start real basic. When we talk about an annulment, what is that?
Okay, well, I mean, it's technically in church law a decree of nullity. The common term annulment sort of implies something which is not true, and that is that it annuls or it breaks a valid marriage. There are a couple cases where the Holy Father can dissolve natural marriages, but in the case of sacramental marriages, and even in the case of natural ones, there has to be obviously reasons for even dissolution of a natural marriage. But for the case of a sacramental marriage, because a ratified and consummated sacramental marriage is indissoluble by any power on earth, the church doesn't have the authority to say that it's dissolved. All it can do, church, is look at the conditions that were in place in the hearts and the minds and the understanding of the parties on the day before they stood before the church, their family, their friends, and God, and said, I do. Did they embrace marriage according to the intention of God, not only in creation, the idea of the natural marriage as a indissoluble union dedicated to the procreation and education of children, but especially in view of what St. Paul tells us in chapter 5 of Ephesians, that marriage should be this self-donation that is a sign of Christ's love for the church. And so what the church does in the annulment process, in granting a decree of nullity, is to say that on the day of the marriage, perhaps one of the parties withheld in their will, for example, the indissolubility of it, by thinking, well, okay, I love her, but of course, if it doesn't work out, I'll just divorce and get remarried. Not thinking in terms of what God is thinking, what the church is thinking. Or they reserve the power of giving life. Well, children are a burden today, and who wants to bring children into our world? Let's have fun. Marriage is fun. Relation in marriage is fun. We're just going to concentrate on that and not going to worry about having children. If you go in with the intention to violate and not form a true marriage, the church is prepared to say that you did not, based on evidence, witnesses, your own witness, of course, or perhaps even to say in some cases that you were not psychologically suited. Today, I think a lot of people understand there's a lot of immaturity regarding sexuality in our culture. And this may predispose people to be incapable of making a lifelong commitment. And when the church finds that that's the case, that is another ground. So there has to be valid grounds. The church is not saying we can dissolve this marriage. No, but we can find that it was never made in the first place.
Colin, let me ask you this question, actually two questions. I get this all the time, and I would love to hear how you would explain it because you do it so well. But actually, we're going to get ready to take a break in just a minute, and so
Okay.
I'll ask you the questions, and then maybe you could, after the break, answer it for all of us.
Okay.
The calls are coming in, so this is a very important subject, and it's a hot subject, too, because the calls came in pretty fast. So if you want to jump in, there's still an open phone line at 1-800-585-9396. Okay, Colin, here's the question.
Okay.
Or the first question. I get this all the time, and I've had people say to me, well, you went through the annulment process, Deb, and that's great for you, but I don't want to do it because that makes my children that I had with the marriage illegitimate.
Yeah, and specifically, the Code of Canon Law provides that they are not illegitimate. The couple with good intentions, although perhaps wrong intention, entered a marriage. The children were born into that, or maybe even they were born before they married, the so-called shotgun marriage. But there was an effort to form a family there, even though it was defective because of the will of one or both of the parties. And so the church honors that and absolutely considers children of marriages which ultimately are found to be invalid to be legitimate. So that's not an issue for the church.
Okay, so now here's the second question, and then we're gonna take the break, and you can come back
Okay.
if you can't get it in time. The second question is that I get all the time is that the party that goes for the annulment, so petitions for the annulment and fills out the paperwork, it is their understanding that the other party, their former spouse, receives and can look at the paperwork. And so I get this question that they say, well, I don't want that to happen because it's going to create horrible relationship for us when we're, trying to co-parent the kids after the divorce. And I don't want them seeing everything I wrote. And what if they contest what I wrote? And so it's a very interesting fear that a lot of people have of them putting down their life on paper. And where does that go? Who sees it? Could it ever come back and to haunt them? But like I just said, if you can hold that though, Colin, we're going to take a break. And when we get back, we'll have you answer. Yeah, we'll have you answer that. So, dear listeners, there's still an open phone line, one open phone line, and I know it's got your name on it. 1-800-585-9396. We are going to take a quick break. This is Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Colin Donovan, and we're talking about annulments. So stay with us. Think about what you want to learn about annulments. This is the day for you to clear up all those misconceptions. Well, we'll be right back.
"60 Seconds" with Mother Angelica.
The Eucharist is the one presence of Jesus that's real. It is the presence of God. He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans. There is no comparison between the other presences of God The presence of God is in His Word. The presence of God is in me and you, or you would dissolve into nothingness. The presence of God is in creation, in the air we breathe. But when that priest says, this is my body and this is my blood, that is the real presence of God. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. It is Jesus Himself, alive.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Thanks for tuning in to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Our blessed opportunity to be with you every day. And today we have Colin Donovan, Vice President of Theology at EWTN. We're talking about annulment. This is when a couple, they appear to have been married. The wedding may have happened in a church. Great big celebration, family, friends, gifts, lived together maybe for any length of time, but upon difficulties arising in the marriage, the church would look back and say, right there was an impediment to the two exchanging the sacrament or what have you. So it really, if you've been through the trauma or going through it right now of an annulment, let Colin Donovan give you some maybe some peace of mind, among other things. And Colin, right before we get to the calls, it was an insightful question from Debbie about, people maybe having this fear of, I know in the annulment process, the requirement is that you've got to be brutally honest and thorough. Some people are afraid of that.
Yeah, and I think, at the beginning in her entrance, Debbie noted how it was a chance to, really come to grips with what had happened. And I think people need to go into it with that frame of mind. Now, I am sure that there are individuals who go into it and they look on their spouse maybe with anger, maybe with contempt or hatred, especially if they did something, terrible that prompted the separation and so on. But I think that you both have struck on this point, and that is, if one goes into it willing to honestly look at the truth, to say, when we married, this was my disposition. And remember, they're looking for you to be honest about your disposition going in, because that could be the basis, or it might be the spouse's disposition going in, or the psychological preparation or state of the person, as noted earlier. So honesty is very, very important. And I think if you go into it not in order to put all the blame on somebody, or to attack the person, or make it look like their fault, but rather what was going on in my own heart at that time. Which is like in confession. It's easy to go into confession and start saying about getting angry and then discussing all the reasons why your anger was justified. That's not an especially good confession. So I think it's going in with that attitude. Don't say anything you're going to regret, and obviously don't say anything false, but speak truthfully and honestly and clearly about the questions you are asked to answer, and to do so without passion or any kind of venom and so on. And if somebody takes offense to that, then I would say they are the one that are taking the offense, and they're not looking honestly maybe at that situation either. Granted, we're all going to come up at something like this from our own subjective perspective. But at least if you don't do it in an angry, venomous way, and in an honest way, I think that it can bring that peace of mind, Debbie, that you talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Colin, let me ask you this. Does the other party get to read the whole entire paperwork, or just a summary of what the other partner has written?
Yeah. Now, I've never been involved in the process myself, so I'm not exactly sure of the answer to that. I can't imagine that, because this is a revelation of conscience, that there is there has to be certain basic facts, because if you think about it, the tribunal members have to judge the facts. It's referred to the court of second instance, which is usually like for Birmingham, it's Mobile, which is our metropolitan see here in Alabama. And so that has to be, and even if it's referred to Rome to the Rota, then you have to have that basic information. But I would think that there are things that are of a revelation of conscience that would not be available for all, and it would have to be held as a committed secret or professional secret by the members of the tribunal.
Interesting. This is really interesting stuff. Okay, so we have Erlinda, who's waiting patiently in Portland, Oregon, listening on Modern Day Radio. Hi, Erlinda. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, and with our guest, Colin Donovan.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
When I heard the annulment, I myself didn't go through it, but my husband did. And it was a long process, but it was well worth it. And one of his fears about this is his wife called and said that it was like denying that his children were never born, and her, because she claimed she had spoken with the priest. And so he was hesitant to do it. Him and I both, we got married twice. We got married through the justice of the peace. And it used to hurt me to watch him be in the choir and not receive when everybody was receiving the Eucharist. And we were married, and I was wanting to come into the church, and I found out I couldn't come into the church because the priest told us we were living in sin. And he was our priest at that time. I just loved the man to death, Monsignor Heinecker, and he handled our process of the annulment, but it was like a biography for him because he had to have family members fill out long paperwork talking about him and the marriage that he was in with his first wife. And some of the children were upset, and I think maybe some of them still may be hurt and going through. But he was married for 18 years when he ended up applying for the annulment. But I wanted to come into the church, and I wanted to see him to be able to receive the Eucharist and do it right, since we had been married through the justice of the peace. So we ended up remarrying, and I tried to get baptized twice. The second time around, the baptismal, I was able to come in because the papers came through. And it came through on my patron saint's feast day, Josephine Bakita. So that just confirmed so much for me on being able to marry my husband and watching him go through these different trials. My heart was breaking, but in the long run, it was the best decision that we ever made, or he made, really. And
Colin, do you want to comment on that? Because I know a lot of people, patience is such a key ingredient to going through the annulment process, isn't it?
It is, because it can take a couple years, and if there's contention and it has to be referred to higher courts, it can take even longer. So it definitely is a trial. But if you think about it, for most people, the thing that is most central in their life is their marriage, the family that comes from that, and so on. So this is really, as it were, existentially at the heart of our life. And therefore it has both the promise of bringing peace and contentment into it, but also all of this turmoil and facing the demons, as it were, that, brought you to the stage that you're separated from your spouse or who you thought was your spouse. So it is a very terribly trying thing. And, of course, the reason the church needs so much information is it needs witnesses, people to confirm the facts alleged by the parties, and so family members to do that. Marriage is a public state of the church. This is certainly the thing which our country doesn't understand anymore. Otherwise, it wouldn't be affirming gay marriage, for example. It's a public state of life. It has public obligations, which is why the government, the state, is involved in it. And therefore, it is important to know what the family's experience is that would support the claims made on behalf of the church granting this decree of nullity. But that's not going to take away the pain of having to go through the process, unfortunately. But hopefully knowing intellectually why this is necessary, will at least give the person the conviction that, well, to get at the truth, I need to do this.
Erlinda, thank you for joining us, kicking off our phone calls here today on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Speaking about annulments with Colin Donovan, Vice President of Theology at EWTN. Our number for that open line, 1-800-585-9396. A lot of calls. We'll get to every one of you, so please do be patient. I know it's an important issue for you, including Steve. Steve is driving through Louisiana today, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the program. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing good. Good morning to you all.
And I've got to ask you, Steve, I don't know if you've listened to the show before. Debbie's criteria are if you're driving, you got to have your seatbelt on and your hands-free device going.
I meet the qualifications.
Oh, good. Now we can
there
proceed.
You go, Deb.
It's a valid phone call now.
Yeah, right.
Valid phone call, yes. I had gone through the annulment process, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And I don't regret it because it's led to increased happiness in my life. But there was one downside to it. We talked about impediments that would necessitate or make it qualify for a nullity. But a lot of times those impediments are very hidden within the family itself, and there's not a lot of other witnesses who would be even aware of what's going on. So and that was the case in my annulment. And so I asked my young daughter, and I think at the time she might have been around 18, 19, somewhere around there, if she would serve as one of my witnesses. And I think you need 2 witnesses, if I recall. And she agreed. And then quite a few years later, she confided in me that she resented me asking her that and that she feels some measure of guilt. So first of all, I just want to say that maybe you could address other people who might be in that process to be aware of that situation. And then are there any options to avoid that kind of situation?
Sure. Well, there are in the norms ways of dealing with, say, a contentious situation where you can't get the witnesses you need. Remember what the church is trying to get at. It doesn't have a validity meter that can, sort of pass it over the two of you and say, here's a valid bond. It has to get at a moral certainty based on the evidence before it. And so it tries to acquire that in a variety of ways. Looking ahead to the Synod a little bit, I think one of the things that may come out of it is ways in which the church can do that in simplified forms to make it, a little bit easier and more cumbersome, to get to that moral certainty that there was no marriage at the beginning. And so this is what has to be done. And I think in explaining to people who are called for this, again, it depends a lot on their goodwill. If they're interested in knowing the truth, if they have some subjective take on it because it was their family member who was the injured party or something like this, or, if they're coming at it from a biased perspective and not simply trying to get at the truth of it, yes, you can have a lot of difficulties. I think in your daughter's case, it's probably just being between mom and dad and having been asked to choose when she probably would have rather stood back and be an observer. But it sounds like it was helpful and necessary in that case, and hopefully any family members would be open to helping a couple arrive at the truth. And I think that's the big thing. There is that scriptural verse, the truth will set you free. But sometimes we don't want to look the truth in the face. We don't want to see what evidence there is that would make us do that. And it becomes very hard, and it becomes more emotional than an act of faith that this is the right thing to do, or an act of reason even that it's the right thing to do. And that's a hurdle which will always be there because we're human beings and because of fallen human nature.
How's that, Steve?
That's good. Thank you.
All right, very good. We are going to get to our break right now. And again, all of you on hold, we will help you out here on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Very important topic. Annulments is what we were talking about with Colin Donovan of EWTN. Phone number is 1-800-585-9396. Or you can post something on our Facebook page. EWTN Catholic Radio is the name of the Facebook page for all of EWTN programming. So more with Colin Donovan and your calls coming right up.
Hear what others are saying about listening to EWTN Radio.
I just wanted to call in. I've been listening for a year now. I converted to Catholicism about a year and a half ago, and this radio station has just been so instrumental. I drive around all day working from my car in sales, and I just can't get enough of it, and it helps inspire me. Just walk the walk every day, so thank you for that.
Listen daily to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sinnott, and I'm host of EWTN's Celtic Connections. From our studios in Ireland, we take a Catholic look at the big stories breaking in Great Britain, in Ireland, and across Europe. Celtic Connections is the only Catholic news show made in the UK or Ireland. So join me every Saturday and Sunday on Celtic Connections.
For dates and times in your area, log on to EWTN.com.
We're so glad you're with us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Tomorrow's show, don't forget tomorrow's show, side-by-side activities. Just when you thought that you were spending quality time with your loved one, going to the movies or going to a concert, you might want to take another look at this, because side-by-side activities can be great, but are they really quality time with the one that you love? So that's tomorrow's show, but today we're talking about annulments, and we're clearing up all the misconceptions about annulments and the misunderstandings, and we have expert guest today, Colin Donovan, with us. He's Vice President of Theology at EWTN, and we're so blessed to have him, and this is the time for you to ask questions. So we're going to move right along, Colin, if that's okay with you, to Debbie
Sure is.
Oh, good. Debbie in Vancouver, Washington, listening on Modern Day Radio. Hi, Debbie. I like your name already. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I love you guys' show. I listen to it anytime I get a chance.
Oh, thank you. So talk about annulments.
Okay, my question is, I recently found out that my mother had been married before. She married my dad. And the question is, she had an annulment done in the early 1950s, but was there also a divorce required by the state?
Yeah, I would assume so. If they were civilly married, to remarry in the church, of course, you can't do that without a decree of nullity. But the state also has requirements for its purposes, for the administration of material things in the culture, property, parental rights, and so on and so forth. So I'm presuming that there might be some situations in the world, especially in persecuted countries, where the church and state are not cooperating, but this has generally been one where they do. Obviously, the church does not allow a bigamy, and neither does the state. So the way the state handles that is through divorce.
Thank you so very much for your answer, and you guys have a great day.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay.
And Debbie, thank you for loving the show, because we just loved your call. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Bye-bye now.
And your
Bye.
name. Thanks,
Yeah.
Debbie. Would somebody named Jerry or Colin call in? We got to even the score here. 1-800-585-9396. We do have a Scott from Portland, Oregon. Wow, Modern Day Radio. You guys rock there in the Pacific Northwest. Hello, Scott. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just fine, Scott.
Great. A couple questions. I heard you mention natural marriage versus sacramental marriage. I was wondering, what the difference in that was. And then is the annulment process just for, I always thought it was just for Catholics, not for just anybody who came into the church.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do Protestants and Orthodox apply to that? Because I was married in the Orthodox Church, but I was Catholic before that and left the church, and then I came back to the church after the divorce because I got divorced. So, kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions, and they all fit because they're all sort of based on the same presumption that the church has. Remember, marriage existed before the church. It existed from the garden. So whenever man and woman enter into the relationship of marriage with the right intentions, in other words, understanding that this is this self-gift to each other. And clearly Adam and Eve would have understood that, and perhaps for some generations after them would have as well. But we know that afterwards came, up polygamy and all kinds of states of life which are not consistent with that understanding. So today the church does indeed, it recognizes the marriages of two people, and it presumes if a couple say they are married, it doesn't interrogate how, it just presumes that they were validly married. And Pope John Paul II actually in his catechesis on Genesis spoke a great deal about this, because he said from the beginning, not only was it this natural social institution, but it was also a natural sacrament of the Trinity, because the man and the woman enter into a community which is analogous to the communion of the persons in the Holy Trinity. So the Church absolutely respects marriages made outside of the church that are entered into with the proper understanding, not of the Trinity necessarily, but of the purpose and the intentions of marriage. Now, the sacramental marriage, as I noted earlier, St. Paul in Ephesians 5 says that it's a mystery, and this is a word which I think as an Orthodox you would understand, is basically used similarly to, in the West, what we use is the word sacrament, a word used by Tertullian first in the 2nd century, late 2nd, early 3rd, to apply to the mysteries of the faith, which are the liturgical rites and so on of the Church, as well as the dogmatic mysteries like the Trinity and the Incarnation. And so Paul is talking about this mystery by which marriage, the union of man and woman, is a sign of Christ's love for his church. So we can think of naturally, marriage is a created mystery, a mystery of creation in which God put his stamp on humanity by not only giving us our spiritual nature, which is a stamp of the divine nature, as it will, the intellect and will and all that personhood gives us, but also a stamp of the Trinitarian nature, and that is the communion of divine persons in the Trinity, and that is marriage. So marriage is naturally that, but then through the redemption, the incarnation redemption, it is also stamped with this image of Christ and his church. And so the church teaches that wherever two baptized people who believe in Christ marry, it's an indissoluble sacrament. And so this sacramental nature is respected. So that's the difference between a natural marriage and a sacramental marriage. The church presumes both are valid, but a sacramental marriage is indissoluble, whereas a natural marriage could be dissolved in favor of the faith, as St. Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 7, that there could be reasons why a person who is baptized or wants to come into the church, their spouse will no longer be content with them, no longer stay with them, and they can be excused from that marital obligation. And then the other question you had is Catholics only? No. The church will look at any marriage that somebody who is baptized or wants to come into the church wants to have adjudicated. Obviously, it can't just open the doors and say to all non-Catholics, if you want an annulment. Well, if you want an annulment, decide that you have the faith of the church, I guess, and come into the church, because we will look at your marriage and we will settle those issues if if there is a problem there in the marriage from the beginning. And so the marriage of two Orthodox, the church would see that as a valid sacramental marriage. The church does not give the economia that the Orthodox Church does, allowing a second, somewhat non-sacramental marriage. Instead, the church looks deeply into the marriage to see if there's grounds for invalidity there. And that has been to now the only solution which the church has tolerated based on the nature of marriage itself and what we must bring to marriage when we make it. Likewise, to Lutherans marry, if it's their first marriage, they're validly married. To non-Christians marry, it's their valid marriage, and so on and so forth, just simply on the grounds of what God did in creating man and woman.
How's that?
So if I wanted to get married a second time in the Catholic Church, I would need an annulment of the Orthodox marriage, correct?
I would not put it that way. You would need to look at that marriage to see if it was valid. And if it was not valid, you're free to marry. That's a factual matter. The church will help arrive at that conclusion. But yes, assuming you were married to an Orthodox woman in the church, so you have a sacramental marriage, I'm presuming.
Okay. Yes, we were married in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. So just like two Catholics, just like two Protestants or a convert coming into the church, for you to be free to marry in the Catholic Church, you would need to have that marriage investigated to see if there was a question of invalidity related to your exchange of vows on your wedding day.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the info.
Thank you, Scott, for calling. Take two with Jerry and Debbie. 1-800-585-9396. From there, we're going to go straight to Meredith, who is in Ohio, listening on EWTN.com. Meredith, you are up next with Colin Donovan on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. How are you?
Hi, good. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, I was calling. I had an annulment 5 years ago, and I've since remarried. And most days over the course of those 5+ years, I've had an immense amount of guilt over the annulment process and the divorce. Mm-hmm. Met with my priest and was reassured that I could remarry before I did so, as well as most people around me. But still struggle with this and was hoping you could offer some tips or advice or maybe recommend a book that would help me and others who are struggling with this to work through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, maybe Debbie or Jerry know of a good book related to that. But on the question generally, I think it's like going to confession. Some people go into the confessional, they confess their sins, and they feel like, a block of marble was lifted from their shoulder. Others go in, and it's usually a temperament issue. It's not a moral issue, but it's usually, a temperament. Certain temperaments are prone to sort of cogitate over things and worry about them. And so when one does that, that's the point where we have to say, well, look, the priest has said, I absolve you from your sins in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Or the church has said your marriage was invalid from the beginning. It really becomes for you an act of faith, not just in the church's processes. Clearly, human processes can fail and be wrong. But it's an act of faith in God's providence that he brought you to this moment. So I think maybe the answer is prayer. It's not an intellectual. It's intellectual to the extent that, what the church has said as an act of authority is the power of the keys. And even if some mistake had been made, you have the church telling you, and you will not be held accountable to God for acting on what the church has told you. So that should give you peace, as well as the knowledge that, if you choose to remarry, God has prepared that ground for you to do so, and to find some peace in that possibility.
And Meredith, just to jump in, because you asked about a book or resources, if you will check back to take2show.com, a couple hours after the show, we're going to be posting some websites like foryourmarriage.org or even Rose Sweet's ministry about life after divorce and kind of overcoming some of the guilt. If you check back on take2show.com, you'll see some of the resources or websites there if that can help.
Okay, I will do that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you for calling in and asking your question. And okay, we're going to move right on. We're going to try to get the calls. This is awesome. Okay, Brenda in Rochester, New York, listening on the Station of the Cross. Hi, Brenda. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Colin Donovan.
Hi. My intended is a cradle Catholic. He married a non-Catholic outside of the church. I guess they got married on the front porch, but in any event, she filed for divorce. She wanted a divorce. She divorced him. I came into the church a while back, married outside of the church. In fact, we married in front of a justice of the peace, had a civil divorce, and then years later, I became Catholic. We would like to marry and want to know, do we have to go through the annulment process?
You have to go through a process. It's not really an annulment process. But it means that the church must look at the factual claims that you make. So, for instance, your husband's say as a Catholic, he married civilly. That would be per se invalid because the church forbids that and invalidates marriages that are done that way. So the facts would be ascertained, and if the facts are as alleged, then he has grounds to remarry. And likewise with you. So it's more of a factual determination than a determination of your intentions, because it's all external to you. It's not what's in your will so much as what you did. You did not get the dispensation to marry in other circumstances than before the church. You married anyway. That marriage is invalid. Those facts will be verified, and the way forward will be clear. So what you still need to do is you need to go to your pastor, get connected up with the tribunal, and start that process to make that determination. I've known people who have been through it. It's not at all as long or as difficult as the annulment process or decree of nullity process for a marriage where they have to investigate the motives of the individuals, the psychological state. That none of that has to be done, because your marriages would have been per se invalid based on being Catholics. Now, were you baptized when you married, or
yes,
but you were not in the church?
Right. Correct.
Okay, that might be a little bit more complicated because likely that would be presumed to be valid. So. Again, you have to bring the matter to the tribunal, and they'll sort it out for you as to whether something more involved would be necessary in your case. Okay?
Does that work, Brenda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, very good. We are making our way through as many calls as we can. Thank you for joining us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. The number is 1-800-585-9396. We do have time for, looks like, probably 2 or 3 more calls, so we'll take you in the order, at least, that you called. Hopefully, Joe in St. Clair, Michigan. Joe in St. Clair, Michigan. Thank you for calling Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, and you're on with Colin Donovan. Hi, Joe.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was married before, and my ex had serious mental health issues, and she filed for divorce multiple years ago. I became a revert back to my faith, and my faith has become a pivotal, central component in my life. As a consequence, I went through the annulment process, and it's clear to all that she has some mental issues. The tribunal granted a nullity, and before it went to the second instance, she proclaimed that she was going directly to the Roman Rota for a appeal. And that process now is close to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, at this point, what are my options?
Sure. Yeah, this was actually used as an example, as to ways in which Rome could sort of slim things down or trim them without cutting down on the the necessity of demonstrating the case and so on and so forth, because the Roman process is very long. If you look at it, there are, I don't know what it is, a couple thousand. Well, maybe not that many, but there are, there's many more dioceses in the church than there are parishes in a diocese. So you can imagine all roads leading to Rome, what the backlog is at the Rota. Even if only one case a year comes to them from every diocese in the world that needs that, and it's probably more than that. So it is a very long thing. I think at this point, about all consolation I ask you is if our listeners would pray for a resolution of this, to end the wait for all the parties, is probably the best thing that we can do for you, since obviously there's not much procedurally that can be done. You've done it all. It's there. It will get decided, but you don't know when.
Okay. It's just that the motives are nefarious, and it just not to be able to receive the body and blood of Christ is a conundrum for me.
Well, unless you've remarried, having been divorced does not prevent you from the sacraments. I guess I'm failing to see what would do that. Divorce is not per se. There obviously in the breakup of a marriage there can be things that need to be confessed as contributing to that. But per se, just the fact that you're separated and divorced from your wife, is not an obstacle. I think find yourself a good confessor to talk to about that and see if you've maybe misunderstood something about the church's discipline.
Okay, Mr. Donovan, thank you for all you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, Joe, for calling in to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. We do have time for one more. We're going to go to Mary in Washington State, listening on Sirius XM 130. Mary, welcome to Take Two, and you've got Colin Donovan standing by, waiting for your question.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I was almost going to call in and say my name was Colin, but I didn't.
Colleen, perhaps. Colleen.
She's
would
paying
have been
attention,
fine.
though. Way to go, Mary.
Right. Well, so my question is this: I was 19 when I got married. I was cradle Catholic, went to Catholic school, everything. But as soon as I got into high school, I stopped practicing my faith, and my first and only boyfriend in high school was a avowed anti-Catholic Baptist. So I really stopped practicing my faith. And we were living together, and it was struggling, and I really wanted to go to college, and things just didn't seem like it was ever going to happen. Well, my boyfriend's father came and said, "Hey, why don't you come and live with me? You can go to school. You don't have to work. You can, So within 3 days, I quit my job, got married, and moved. And didn't practice my faith for a while, but then once I got pregnant and I really wanted to raise my kids Catholic, and I came back to the church, but he never joined, but I was able to join while I was in the military, and I was able to, through the military archdiocese,
Sure.
because we moved a lot, get my children, baptized and everything. Well, for 10 years we were married, but it was just, God was not in my marriage. It was really kind of tragic, and I got a civil divorce, and I'm just wondering, I can't really afford to pay for an annulment. Could I even get an annulment? I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, clearly the fact you came into the church, I presume that your marriage was, you either had a new exchange of vows or it was received what's called a radical healing at the root by the church or something of that nature. What people generally say is blessing of some form or another. Did that happen? Did the church acknowledge your marriage to him?
No, I just never. No.
You never did that.
I just went back
and
to the church and
okay,
receiving communion. I've never remarried or anything like that.
Well, because you were Catholic and you were married outside the church, there's a really good question whether that was a valid marriage or not, despite what you subsequently did in coming back to the church. So I, again, like as the previous gentleman, I would go to your pastor and get an appointment with somebody at the tribunal to explain your case. It may be, as I noted to one caller, a simple case of factually demonstrating that you married outside the church without dispensation, in other words, what's called without the Catholic form, and that was never corrected or reconciled or sanated or anything of that nature at any time, such that is still the predominant fact of that marriage, that it was outside the church without the Catholic form. If that's the case, it's invalid, and so you would be free to have that, bring that to the tribunal. They could decide that was true, and on the basis of that, you are then free to marry in the church. So again, I think a lot of the listeners are probably hearing these stories and think, well, I've got sort of facts like that. It doesn't cost you anything to talk to your pastor, to talk to somebody at the tribunal and explain all of this and get their opinion. And it doesn't actually cost all that much. Shouldn't cost more than a few $100s in a diocese, and they can actually waive that if they choose to do it. So it's worth making the exercise, and I encourage everybody in that situation to do it.
All right, Mary, thank you for your phone call. Joe in Cheyenne, Wyoming, we just simply don't have enough time to do your call justice, but I'll tell you what, if you want to email us, it's take the number 2 at EWTN.com. You hear by the music, we're just up against the clock. Colin, great job, and listeners will hear you again on Friday's Open Line, right?
That's right, Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern.
All right, thank you so much, Colin Donovan. Debbie, my takeaway is we've got a church that really has our best interests in mind and is very loving and merciful. Sometimes it's a little painful, but it really is for our betterment. You know from personal experience.
I feel exactly the same way. Couldn't add a single word to that. And tomorrow's show, dear listeners, again, side-by-side activities. We want you to join us. But until then, have a beautiful and blessed day.